What if I told you that being the perfect parent could make life harder for your child? That the very things we strive for, like unwavering patience, constant availability, and always knowing exactly what to say, might not set them up for success, but instead for struggle. Sounds counterintuitive, right? But stay with me because today we're unpacking why striving to be the perfect parent isn't the gift that we think it is, and what to aim for instead. Hi there. If this is your first time here, welcome to the Parenthood and Relationship Podcast. I'm your host, Markella Kaplani, a psychologist, a parenthood and relationship coach, and a parent myself. Together, we explore the transformative journey of parenthood and its profound impact on our relationship with ourselves, our partners, and our children so that we can be present and show up as we envision without having to do more. Let's get into today's episode. In my work with parents and couples, I have recently observed something quite interesting. While many adults struggle with wounds caused by feeling unseen, criticized, or emotionally abandoned by their parents, there's another less talked about group of people who struggle in a different way. They are the ones who grew up with mothers or fathers who they saw as flawless. So today I want to talk about how being the perfect parent can actually backfire, leading to unexpected problems later in adulthood. And I want to do that using the story of a past client of mine. Let's call him Michael. Obviously, I've changed a lot of facts and key characteristics in the story so that the person that I'm referring to is non-identifiable. And in fact, it would be very hard to identify who I'm talking about because this case study is one that comes from a variety of clients who have posed similar issues. Still, you're going to find it very interesting, and I wonder if some of you may identify with this person. If you do, it would be very interesting to hear what your experience was like, whether you want to share it publicly on YouTube comments or you want to DM me at markella.kaplani. So let's get into it. Michael grew up in what seemed like the perfect emotional environment. His mother was everything you could hope for in a parent. Warm, kind, intuitive, present. She was the kind of parent who always knew what her child wanted before he even expressed it. She never raised her voice or made him feel like a burden. She never allowed him to feel disappointment for long enough before she stepped in. He never had to wonder whether he was loved. That sounds like a dream childhood, doesn't it? When I first met Michael, I ran an assessment like I normally do when I start working with someone who is presenting issues in his or her relationships. I looked for signs of conditional love. Was there an unspoken expectation that he had to be a certain way in order to be loved? Had he been made to feel like certain parts of himself were not accepted? Had he received subtle messages, maybe, that his worth was tied to his achievements, or his behavior, or his ability to please others? These are common things that people who struggle in relationships or struggle with self-esteem have experienced. But no, none of that was there. Now, whether his mother was or wasn't perfect, we cannot know objectively, and there's no way to quantify it. However, what matters is that she was perfect to him. He felt completely and unconditionally loved and safe with her. And yet, as an adult, he presented with struggle to maintain any kind of meaningful relationship, while also showing very low self-esteem and people-pleasing tendencies. Now, obviously, Michael was very close to his mother. She was his safe haven, his emotional rock. And while having such a strong emotional bond is a great thing, here is where it becomes complicated. She wasn't just his source of comfort. She was also his ideal. No one else could measure up. In friendships, in romantic relationships, at work, Michael struggled to find the kind of emotional connection that felt right. Every woman he dated, no matter how wonderful, always somehow seemed to fall short. No one had the right balance of kindness and firmness and honesty and integrity. No one was as intuitive, as emotionally generous, as comforting as his mother had been. And because of that, he was very disappointed, which then also led to the coping mechanism of just cutting people off from his life at the first sign of disappointment. If someone didn't immediately understand his needs, if someone didn't feel right, he would disengage. Why settle for anything else when you know what real comfort, what unconditional love looks like? And then, at a certain point in time, his mother passed. And for the first time, he started to realize just how dependent he was on that perfect relationship. He had spent his life looking for that someone who could match that perfect bond that he had. But he never built the skills needed to navigate the imperfections of relationships. And now, with time slipping by, he was left facing the question, how do you build a good relationship, a lasting companionship, when no one and nothing ever feels good enough? When no one and nothing ever makes you feel good enough? All of us have been taught how important it is to create a strong bond, how important it is to love our children unconditionally. How is this supposed to be a bad thing? How do children who perceive their mothers as perfect end up having such issues? The simple answer is that perfection, or the illusion of it, can distort our sense of what the world is like, our expectations of people around us. So let's go through all the ways that this can show up. So the first way is that no exposure to imperfection can lead to low tolerance of reality. Children learn about relationships, about the world, and about themselves through their interactions with their parents. If a mother is always patient, never flustered, never shows discomfort, and meets all our needs before we even recognize them ourselves, as children, we will not learn to tolerate frustration. We will not learn to be patient in the face of discomfort. Think about it. If the first and most foundational relationship of your life feels completely safe, soothing, and flawless, how do you handle the messiness of the real world? If your mother or father was constantly emotionally attuned, never let you feel any unresolved negative emotion, and never really made mistakes, not any that really hit home and made her feel like she is more human rather than a god, you didn't actually get the practice of dealing with small, manageable disappointments. So this in adulthood can show up as extreme frustration when relationships don't feel exactly right, or when a partner doesn't respond exactly as expected. It can make a person highly sensitive to rejection, not because they experienced rejection, but because they never experienced minor relationship ruptures in order to learn how to repair them. Another common consequence is emotional dependence. Not in an obvious way, but in a subtle sense. A person who grows up with a perfect mother may struggle to form new and deep attachments because consciously or subconsciously, they are searching for someone who feels exactly like home. For Michael, this meant that any woman who didn't meet his needs instinctively, who didn't have that perfect balance of warmth and wisdom, felt wrong. Not necessarily bad, just off. Having been in such a safe relationship with his mother, everything else just felt like a letdown. So now we can slowly start to see how it's not just important that we as parents make our children feel safe, but also that we help them learn the tools to create that safety when the world around them starts to feel just a little bit unstable. If they only experience safety, if they never have to repair, then both their expectations are very high and unrealistic, really, and also they are lacking in tools so that they can feel confident that they can survive in this world, that they can create relationships that last and make them feel fulfilled. Another very unintended consequence of being the ideal parent for our children is that it can create a subtle, unspoken pressure on the child. If your mother or your father is always perfect, if they're always available, if they're always patient, if they're always understanding, where does that leave you? Some children, rather than feeling free under that kind of love, feel this unspoken expectation to live up to it. They might become even more afraid of disappointing their mother, even though she may have never actually criticized them. When they start to feel big emotions, when they start to feel frustration, when they are unhappy, they may not feel comfortable to bring that to their mother because they never see her break in any sense or form, so they don't know whether this is okay. As a result, they may suppress negative emotions. And later in life, this can turn into severe self-doubt. A person who's grown up this way may start to really doubt their decision-making abilities, wondering if they're doing the right thing, if they're doing the moral thing, if they're acting with integrity like their mother or their father did. They may fear conflict, they may fear asserting themselves just because they never really experienced rupture, and just because with a parent who is always composed, they don't know what it's like. And they never experienced this kind of interaction in order to know that even some kind of a disagreement or an argument even can be resolved. And so the fourth way that this can show up, and the way that we discussed that it showed up in Michael quite a bit, relationships just feel off because they are imperfect, because they have arguments, because they have disagreements, because sometimes there are certain conditions in us being well together. You have to meet my needs, I have to meet your needs. So we're not talking about bad relationships here, but really deeply human ones that are branded as bad, as not enough, as imperfect. In contrast to the relationship with the mother that felt fairy-like and magical and unconditional like that, effortless even. Michael, for example, spoke about how early on in life he was convinced that he wanted a family. From very early on, he really was looking for that person that he would settle down with. But he could never quite get past those early stages of dating. Any small sign of friction felt like, oh, this is not the right person for me. And that is because growing up, he never had to work for that emotional closeness. Now, I'm not suggesting that we need to make our children feel like they're not loved unconditionally or that they have to work hard to earn our attention or our love, but it is important that our children see us as human. It is important that we are okay with the fact that at some point we snapped, the fact that at some point we were less than patient, and to be able to repair and use that as an example of how relationships are and how our children can repair as well. And so it's really important that we also discuss the inevitable. What happens for this child who had this perfect parent or the perfect parents when they're gone? If their emotional security was based on these parents, and so they weren't able to form any close relationships to friends or to a partner, what happens then? Whether we're talking about loss or distance or life conditions that no longer provide this proximity to that parent, there comes a point where we have to create our own resources for emotional stability. If we have never had to do that because it was seamlessly, effortlessly done in our home, it was there, then adulthood can feel quite disorienting. Michael experienced this in a very extreme way. Without his mother as his anchor, he felt completely lost and alone in the world. And with his ability to navigate relationships being limited, he didn't feel he had the tools to really go out there and seek what it is that he truly wanted. This made him even more reluctant and more critical of whatever it is that he saw that didn't match what he was looking for. As a protective mechanism, it is easier to cut people off before you even start to feel anything for them, before you start to become in any shape or form vulnerable toward them, than to let them in and then not know how to navigate any difficulties that come up. Because these difficulties automatically to you feel like a threat because you don't know how to handle them. You've never seen these kinds of difficulties, so they're very strange and they're very threatening to you. When I don't know what conflict is, I don't know how to resolve it. And when I don't know how to resolve it, then I don't feel like I can sustain connection and I don't feel safe. So where does this leave us? If being the perfect parent can have such unintended consequences, then what should we be aiming for? And that's a very valid question. We live in a world now that keeps on reminding us about the high stakes of parenting, how early attachment shapes children's future, how our words and our actions become part of their inner voice, how childhood experiences will shape their relationships, their self-esteem, and even their long-term mental health. So it can become really overwhelming, and I get it that what I am talking about here today can seem like it's going against everything you've ever heard or read. And knowing that you're here, you are someone who truly cares about not leaving your child with any kind of wounds that will scar their future. So here is a reassurance to you. Being a good enough parent versus a perfect one is not about doing anything less. It's just about doing some things a little bit differently. It's about shifting the goal from providing constant comfort to helping my child be able to build the tools to handle any kind of discomfort. It's about moving away from being their emotional anchor to teaching them how to create their own emotional stability. And no, we're not going to purposely let them down and purposely frustrate them and purposely not be there for them or be patient with them so that we can teach them these tools. But we can allow ourselves to be human. And in that, we can create a better relationship with ourselves and with our partners as well. Because if I can be more human and I carry less guilt and shame for that one time I snapped, if I don't have to worry about my every move and how it may affect my child 30 years from now, if I can rest assured that I can repair and that this repair does not only fix what has happened in the now, but will also be what they can use in order to maintain connections that are so vital for their mental health in the future as adults, then I can be more relaxed in parenthood. I can enjoy my partner better. And then I can show up differently for my child as well, not constantly questioning whether I'm a good parent or not. And the good news is that research itself backs this up. This is what kids need. Not perfect parents, not flawless love, but something called secure attachment, which is built through consistency, repair, and yes, small doses of imperfection. Hey, small parentheses, you may notice now, and you may have noticed in other episodes as well, that my voice at some points may sound a little bit different. And so let me explain why this happens. I cut the recording and return to it. And why does that happen? Well, because of parenthood, of course. So in recording today's episode, I had to stop the recording because I wasn't done to go pick up my son from his martial arts practice. Other times, recording takes way longer than I would have wanted it to, and it's time to pick him up from school. And so this is the reality of parenthood. If you have ever wondered, how do I get to do this? And how do I talk about how stressful parenting is and how motherhood changes us and how everything starts to revolve around parenthood, matrescence, patrescence. But how does Markela do this? And how is she wearing her makeup? And how is she recording and showing up every week? Well, I am showing up every week in bits and pieces that are then connected together on a platform that mixes and matches and tries to correct all the ways in which my sound may be different or my tone may be different or everything. So just so you know, this is the reality of it. You don't get much behind the scenes here, but this is a glimpse of it. So if I am sounding different, I always try to make it sound as uniform as possible in my editor, but it's not always possible. So bear with me. This is the imperfection we're talking about, isn't it? So getting back to what we were talking about, what does it mean to be a good enough parent, a good enough mother, a good enough father? Well, this is not a new concept. The term good enough mother specifically comes from Donald Winnicott, a pediatrician and psychoanalyst who studied how babies form attachments. What he found is that children don't need their mothers to respond to them perfectly every time. In fact, he found that a mother who is always attuned can actually limit the child's development. Instead, the best kind of parenting is one where a child can experience small, manageable disappointments, times where their needs aren't instantly met. Because that is what helps them learn emotional regulation, resilience, and problem solving. So what does that look like exactly in daily life? It means sometimes misreading your child's signals, sometimes being distracted, sometimes losing your patience, and then, most importantly, repairing, recognizing what happened, recognizing the letdown, and then being able to work on it. Apologizing and showing them how relationships work. Because in doing so, you are teaching them one of the most important lessons of all, that love does not require perfection, that people can get it wrong and still be worthy of connection, that relationships can have ruptures and still be repaired. So no, letting go of perfection does not mean that you're messing up your child. It means you are preparing them for the reality of healthy human relationships. You're teaching them that love is safe, but it's also real. That people, including their parents, make mistakes, but those mistakes don't break the connection. And that, ultimately, is the foundation of secure, healthy attachment. So now that we've really honed in on and broken down how perfection isn't necessary, how do we actually apply this? How do we make the shift from striving to be everything for our children at all times to being just enough in a way that fosters their emotional development? This is where the concept of the good enough mother comes in, not as a way to justify neglect or passiveness, but as an intentional, mindful approach in parenting that focuses on growth over perfection. A good enough mother isn't one that ignores her child's needs or lets them struggle on their own so that they can toughen up. She is one that allows space for imperfection, for small frustrations, and ultimately for growth, while still providing the warmth and security that every child needs. Let's look at the practical, tangible steps to do that. One easy way to start this, step one, is to let them see you make mistakes and let them see you, without criticizing yourself, trying to fix them. One of the biggest gifts that you can give your children, one of the best lessons that they will have in life, is that mistakes are part of life. If your child always sees you as composed, always in control, never making errors, they will either feel like they have to be perfect too, which then leads to self-criticism or anxiety, or they will never develop the skills in order to repair a relationship when a mistake eventually and inevitably happens. Practically, you can do that by narrating mistakes as they happen in real time. If you snap at your child, for example, instead of pretending that it didn't happen and then overcompensating potentially by being especially sweet and snuggly, you can say, I was feeling really frustrated and I didn't mean to snap at you, but I did. I should have taken a deep breath first. I'm sorry. This models emotional regulation and conflict resolution at the same time. Another way is to let them in on your decision-making process. If you forget something or you make an error, show them how you problem solve. I totally forgot to pack your snack today. What do you think we could do next time so that I make sure to remember? A second way or a second step in order to become more of a good enough mother or father instead of a perfect parent is to allow children to have those small, manageable disappointments that Winnicott was talking about. It is very tempting to want to protect our children from any kind of pain or frustration. Watching them struggle can be so heartbreaking. But small frustrations are critical in developing emotional resilience. If a child never experiences small disappointments in a safe, controlled environment, as is in front of a loving parent, then they won't have the tools to handle a disappointment when life inevitably hands one to them. So what you can practically do is to make sure that you resist the urge to immediately hand them a solution. If your child loses a game and they're very frustrated and they're crying, do not rush in very quickly to say, it's okay, you'll win next time. Instead, allow space for that emotion to occur. I know that this was really disappointing. You worked really hard and it didn't go the way you wanted. That's tough. This teaches them that they can sit in the discomfort without fearing it. Another way to practically do this is to teach them problem solving instead of offering a solution yourself. If your child forgets their homework at home, for instance, instead of rushing to bring it to them, which is going to be your immediate response, I know, ask them, what's your plan for handling this? This builds independence and accountability, and it shows them that you trust them as well to handle it while you're holding their hand. A third way, or a third step, is to teach them that relationships have ruptures and that these ruptures are repairable. Many of us adults will struggle in relationships not because we were not loved, but because we never learned that conflict is a part of life and that it is manageable. If every relationship in our lives, if the most foundational relationship in our life feels seamless and effortless and so ideal, then conflict will feel like a threat every single time. And what do we do in the face of threat? Well, we either fight or we flight or we freeze, right? And none of these reactions will help us maintain real, deep connections in our lives. So the practical way to do this? Well, don't fear conflict with your child. We, first and foremost, are afraid of being in a disagreement with our child. But instead of fearing it, we can use it as a learning opportunity. If you and your child argue about something, don't just move on when it's over. Discuss it. You can start the conversation by saying, "We were both very upset at each other earlier, and I think we misunderstood each other. Do you want to talk about what happened?" This teaches them that emotional closeness isn't about avoiding conflict, but about working through it. Another way to practically do this is to model apologizing and setting boundaries at the same time. So instead of just saying, "I'm sorry," it's very important to teach accountability and self-respect. So it's not enough to just say, "I am sorry that I raised my voice earlier." It's even better to say, "I was overwhelmed and I raised my voice and I'm sorry because that wasn't the best way to handle the situation. And what I will do in the future is that I will take a deep breath and try using my calm voice the way that I've taught you to do so as well." Maybe we can try doing it together and it can help us resolve our argument easier. A fourth step is to encourage autonomy and decision making. One of the biggest signs of secure attachment isn't just feeling loved, but it's also feeling capable. If a mother is so ideal, if she always has the answers, if she always offers solutions, if everything is resolved seamlessly, then a child may never build the confidence that they need in their own abilities. This can lead to indecisiveness, low self-esteem, anxiety, or people-pleasing in adulthood. So instead, let your children make age-appropriate decisions. Instead of choosing their outfit, you can say, "Do you want the blue sweater or the red one?" Instead of forcing them to hug a relative, you can ask them, "Would you like to give a hug, a fist bump, or just say hello?" Another way to do this, and I'm sure you've heard about this and it really works, is to praise the effort over the outcome. Instead of saying, "Oh, wow, you're so smart," you can say, "Wow, I noticed how hard you worked on solving that puzzle. Look how far you got." This teaches them a growth mindset and that their worth is not tied to external success or external praise. Finally, I encourage you as a fifth step to embrace emotional messiness, yours and theirs. There is no right way to be a good parent. Some days you will be patient and playful, and other days you will be exhausted and irritable. Some days you will feel like you're getting everything right, and some days you will feel like you're barely holding it together. And that is exactly what your child needs to see from you. Practically, this is letting your child experience the full range of their emotions. Instead of urging them, "Don't be sad," it is saying, "I understand that you're feeling sad right now. I'm here with you." And another practical step, one that most parents struggle with, is letting yourself have grace as a parent, giving yourself grace. Instead of spiraling into guilt after a rough day, it's reminding yourself, "I don't have to get it right all the time. I just have to show up, love my child, and repair when needed." Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a reflection exercise. Grab your journal that you've dedicated to this podcast, or just find a few quiet moments to consider these following questions. What messages did I receive about good parenting while growing up? And do I agree with them? When do I feel most connected with my child? What am I doing in those moments? Where does my perfectionism show up in parenting? And what fears drive it? And finally, what's one small way that I can practice being a good enough parent this week? Well, that's it. I hope that this episode reassured you that you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. If this episode resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. So make sure that you comment below or that you send me a DM. Every way that you can find me is down in the show notes or the description. Share this episode with a fellow parent who may need to hear this. And check out my show notes where I have all my resources linked, where you can find, for example, the Calm Parent, Calm Child guide that can be a great fit with this episode that we just had today. It's free and it's a great resource to support you in being confident as a parent and feeling a stronger connection with yourself, with your partner, and with your children. If you're looking for even more exclusive tips, make sure that you sign up to my free newsletter. You can find it at markelakaplani.com/newsletter. Thank you for spending this time with me on the Parenthood and Relationship podcast. Remember that parenting is not about getting it right every time. It's about being real and showing up as your beautiful, authentic human self and teaching your child that love doesn't have to be perfect. It's all about connection. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and I'll see you next Sunday. Bye-bye.